So we're going to talk about the basics of the skull for this video. The bones of the skull fall into two categories. The first is the cranial bones, and the second is the facial bones. Facial bones are generally anterior and inferior, and cranial bones are superior and lateral. In this case, now I just looked at a superior view of the skull. We have this bone right here, the frontal bone, separated by the coronal or frontal suture. Posterior to that are paired parietal bones, and they are separated by a sagittal suture. If we look at a lateral view of the skull, we see the frontal and the parietal bones here. We have two bones that are on the side of the skull, the temporal bone, and anterior to that is the sphenoid bone. Between the temporal bone and the parietal bone is a suture right here. This is called the squamous suture. And then looking at a posterior view of the skull, we have the occipital bone with paired parietal bones separated by the lambdoid suture. Let me see. When we look at the anterior aspect of the skull, we look at if you look right down the medial surface here, a very small bone called the nasal bone, and the nasal bone is paired. And posterior from that is the lacrimal bone, and posterior to that, the lacrimal bone is right there, and posterior to that is the ethmoid bone. Continuing on our journey here in the face here, so in this area right here is the maxilla, and the maxilla is the superior portion of the mouth, and posterior to that is the zygomatic bone. The zygomatic bone then articulates with the temporal bone right there. And then inferior to that is the mandible, and the mandible is the mobile portion of the mouth. If you look at inferior to that, this part right here is called the hyoid bone, and the hyoid bone is the bone that basically helps with the tongue and movement of the mouth. Let me see.